When I was in Minnesota, a friend of mine offered to grow some plants for me in her garden. She had a big garden in the family house, plenty of room for a few pots, and was very willing to have a go, even though she used cannabis herself, for her, where it was in sort of a typical suburban neighborhood, it was still a challenge to overcome fears that were generally around her, because while it had been legalized in Minnesota for medicinal use, it still had to be prescribed. You still had to go to a dispensary. You had to pay for it, and you didn't need a prescription, but you did have to be registered, and for various things could put you on the register, but you had to pay for that. Even if you had lower back ache, you could get a medicinal dispensary card, and then you would go and get just vapable oil. You couldn't buy the natural plant product, you couldn't grow it, unlike other states where those aspects were available. So we had talked about this, and she had expressed an interest in growing something so that it could be turned into medicine. But it was fairly late in the season. It was quite well into spring, and to have got hold of seeds, which at the time was the only thing that was available, would have been the only option, would have taken too long to get to the stage where it would have had enough time to grow over the summer and be ready to harvest before it started to get cold again. So I sort of let it go, because I did ask a couple of people, is there any way you might be able to get a seedling or a clone of another plant if you know somebody who grows? And it never really seemed to lead anywhere. Then one day, spontaneously actually, I get invited to join a few people on a day's road trip. We're going to go off in their car and have a picnic somewhere, and go to sort of quaint little towns and look at antiques or whatever it was that they wanted to do. But it was just nice to get out. It was a nice warm late spring day. We're driving along, and we're going past a lake, and it's quite a scenic route, and there are little lay-bys along the way where you can stop and look out, little viewpoints for people to experience the peace and the beauty of the scene. And as we're driving along, suddenly she says, pull over quickly, Mike, pull over. And Mike almost has to make an emergency stop to not go past the entrance to the little scenic viewpoint. And we stopped, we got out, we stood, and we had a look, and very nice it was. And then I looked down to my right, and I saw 5 cannabis plants growing in the ground. How the hell did they get there? How on earth could they have grown? This was a place that was visited by lots of people constantly. People driving along, pulling over, stopping. And by the size of the plants, while they were a little leggy, a little spindly, they had to have been there for a couple of weeks, at least. They were something like this big. So they weren't just grown seedlings. I couldn't believe it. Did somebody scatter seeds and they happened to germinate? Or did they deliberately plant them and hope that somebody might find them who would make use of them? I don't know. It was just such a bizarre thing to come across, especially as just a few weeks earlier I'd been imagining how I might find some plants. Well, we just started the trip, so I carefully dug up the 3 strongest looking and put them into a plastic bag and put them into the boot of the car, and then we drove off. And when we got to the nearest town, which was probably about 10 or 15 minutes further along, there are newly planted planters with fresh soil by the looks of it in the town. And just near to one of the planters is a bicycle with a basket in the front of it, and in the basket is a small polystyrene cup. So I take the cup, an empty cup, so I take the cup out of the basket, I fill it up with soil from the planter, and I put the plants into the soil, give it some water, wrap it up in the plastic bag to protect it from the heat that it might experience, the dryness from being in the boot all day, and then we go off and have our day's adventure. I send a message to my friend, and she says, on your way home, come by and drop them off, and the following day she'll go out and get compost and the right size pots, and we'll start the process. And that's exactly what happened. The plants survived the day in the boot. They got planted up the following day, which she did. She was the one who tended the plants, grew the plants. She asked me for advice. She didn't know how to grow these things. And I would go around periodically and have a look at them. And I explained to her the importance of them having darkness when they were flowering, and information that she needed when she needed it. And she just sort of slotted the pots in with all the other plants that she was growing, all the other vegetables and flowers in the area, and we just left them to grow. By the end of summer, we had 2 6 or 7 foot plants. They were actually getting too tall for the fence, which was beginning to give her a little concern, that peeking out from one of the fences was what to me and to her, but not to anybody else, was clearly a cannabis plant. I used that plant. It wasn't able to grow into full maturity to create something that would have been really enjoyed smoking, but I was able to use it to create something that could be taken edibly. And that was what I put towards the current idea at the time, which was to make something that could be taken in capsule form. The most convenient way to take a medicine. Nothing that needed tasting, nothing that needed measuring out. Something that was dry, easy to touch, could just pop it in your mouth, take a swig, swallow it, forget about it, job done. And I produced it, and I made it. The problem was that it just didn't have the shelf life that I needed it to, and it wasn't something that was taken very often, and almost nobody else took it. I did offer it here and there. I did give it to some people. Only 1 person, 2 people actually took it, but it just didn't seem right somehow. It was either for me, and I didn't need to take it very often because it was quite a powerful experience in a concentrated form like that, what they call RSO. But just to get it that way, that in a sense it was given by the universe as a gift. It had come to me in the most unexpected way that I could never have imagined in a million years, and that somehow over the few weeks that they had been growing and all the people that had been stopping, nobody noticed. Nobody saw what they weren't expecting to see, yet somehow I saw it almost immediately, and immediately knew that I could protect them long enough to get them into proper ideal growing conditions and see what happened. They were not the strongest of plants. They didn't have the best upbringing, as it were. They were lovingly looked after once we got hold of them, but they had already, in a sense, not had the good start that they needed. And while the summer was reasonable, it wasn't exactly really ideal for them where they were growing and the conditions they were in. They didn't get sun until early afternoon. If they had been able to have got sun all day, that would have changed things again. But it was just nice to have a go and to end up with something that could be used. Such a blessing. And it got called by a name that I have applied to, that had been in my mind to make, that came up years before, when an idea of actually growing something in a large scale over at my friend's, the camp, the girls' summer camp that he worked at, when they weren't using it, it was empty. So we could easily have come to an agreement to use one of the dormitories, get lights, grow plenty of plants, and then have enough to not have to do it again. You only needed to do it one time. We then imagined that we would invite people to come up and They would stay for a weekend, and we would provide them with the finest smoking material available, which we eventually called the holy shit! Exclamation mark. Because we thought that when you took it, you would, holy shit! You would either exclaim in amazement at how good it was, or it was the holy shit. It was the holy stuff. It was the sacred stuff that if you took it with that feeling, you would have an experience that would give you insight, offer you a perspective, give you ideas, creative expression that you hadn't had before. And I like the sound of that. I never got to do that. But each of the things that have been made along the way, I thought were the holy shit. But actually they weren't. The holy shit is this alcohol tincture, all organic, that has been a collaboration with my sister, who used her green fingers to grow things that she'd never grown before, for the first time dealing with the effects of making sure that there was no mold, and we did have to deal with that towards the end, having to drag these incredibly heavy pots into her conservatory to give them more opportunity to be warmer when it started to get colder, because again, growing it here, unlike in America, we don't have the right climate, and yet she was able to produce something as good as an experienced gardener that I know in Cornwall, who grows each year in his garden, does. And he has longer light, better, warmer, more sun, etc. And he has many, many years experience growing these plants. So she produced something amazing. And with that quality of raw ingredient, I felt inspired to now make this rather than try to make that again. And it's turned out to be exactly what I was trying to make. And that is now the holy shit. When you take this, you may likely have an experience and give you an insight into something, your life, your ideas, where you might want to go. You'll get to see things from a perspective that will make it clearer about what it is that you might want to do, especially if you're not sure about something, not sure what happens next, not sure about how you feel about a thing. You get to look at it in a way that you haven't been able to before, and that will give clarity. That will provide that will give you what you need, basically. Or you just have a very nice experience, or you just get to chill out in front of your favorite film, eating crisps and just having a night in and going to bed and having a good night's sleep and having good dreams. And everybody has a different experience. Everybody basically has the experience they need to have. It is an incredibly conscious experience. And if you believe in the idea of the plant has a spirit, which many people do, and for me it feels feminine. When I grew plants, the first time I grew my own plants in the attic of our house in Penzance, I would sit with them. I would meditate with them. I would just spend time with them. Obviously, I would be looking after them physically, making sure they had enough to drink and to eat and enough light and warmth and air flowing over them. But I would just sit with them because it felt good. And somehow I was getting to know them. I cared about them. They were growing something that I would get to use that would be of invaluable proportions to me for what would be my next aspect of life, which I didn't know at the time, where I would have to live alone in a small van in the wilderness. And having this to use while I was doing that opened the door of creativity so much. I got to express and explore and experience and see and consider and recognize and realize many things with its help. Very, very grateful for that. But even in this day and age, or even in America, where there are places where you can buy herbal stuff just to use freely and can be completely free and unfearless with it, it's still not nice to burn things, and there's smoke and there's ash and there's soot and there's smells, and many places you can't smoke anymore and so on. It's much nicer to be able to take something that you can just take easily, swallow easily, drop into a drink easily, and you can use anywhere and everywhere. And another level of freedom has come about in having something like that, and also the effect that comes from it is the most balanced that I've had. Well, it's really the most balanced I've had. The previous capsule was very strong. It was almost approaching psychedelic, and really it couldn't function. You had to just be alone in bed and just go off into imagination land. But this is different. This, you actually can be in the world. You can do things. It actually makes things clearer. It heightens. Awareness is more. For me, I limit external stimulation because I become hypersensitive to it. But if I'm walking in the fields or in nature, it's lovely. And just sitting quietly or lying in bed or listening to music or watching some gentle thing, nature program, whatever, it's beautiful. It's a beautiful experience. It's very relaxing. It's very healing. And at any moment, idea, insight, imagination, inspiration can hit because you've opened the door to it, and it's not called, I'm not calling it the holy shit for nothing. As much as I would like to share this in a very widespread way, I can't, unless I had access to a much greater quantity of product. The raw material takes a long time to grow. The process of extraction takes time, and because again, you don't want to have to take half a pint of something, you only want a very small amount that's convenient to carry and easy to add. You don't end up with a lot. But there are some people I will give it to, some people I want to give it to, some people I would like to try it, just for my own data purposes, if nothing else, so that I understand, while I've tested it and I've understood the effects on me and the dose that works good for me, everyone else is different, and I need to know whether or not I've got the right dose for them. The only way to understand this is through experimentation and feedback. And when I have that information, and then by next year, when hopefully get to do it again, it will be more efficiently done next time, both in the growing and in the potion making, so that there will be even more, it will be even more special. And unlike a good whiskey, it ages well. So the longer it sits, the more potent it gets. And I like that too. It doesn't have to be taken out until it's actually needed once it's past a certain point. And just like some extremely expensive single malt 40-year-old things, well, it doesn't have to be 40 years old. For this type of substance, 6 months is like a 30-year-old whiskey. And it will give me a lot of pleasure to find somebody who tells me how much they benefited how much they enjoyed, how much it maybe surprised them. If they are already cannabis users, then the experience will of course be in many ways familiar. As I said, it has a balance that they may not be used to, especially if they've only ever smoked it. But even if they've taken an edible, like a chocolate or something like that before, I believe this is balanced in a way that those aren't. It's whole plant. It's not been processed, over-processed in a commercial way, which is the only way to experience edibles in a legal way over there. So yeah, so that's what I've been doing. That's been my hobby, my project for the last while, and I'm here to say that the result is grade A, premier. I wasn't sure that that's what would happen. I hoped that that's what would happen, but I had to accept that in many times, many instances when I attempt to do things, they don't always work out. I spent ages with a mescaline cactus that I acquired, slowly turning it into something that could be taken orally and have an actual psychedelic experience. And when I finally took it, it wasn't anywhere near what I was looking for. I either didn't do it right or something unknown took place, but I just didn't end up with what it was that I was after. So I never know, even if I feel sure that I'm doing the right thing, I never know if what I'm going to end up with will actually be what I've imagined. And sometimes it's just that I'm not supposed to take certain things at certain times. It wasn't suitable for me, it wasn't right for me. But this is. And I'm really happy about that. And if I can make it available for others to try, so that they can understand the medicinal benefits of taking this plant this way, whether they've had the opportunity to try cannabis before or not, they will be having this experience for the first time. And I don't really know anybody right now who uses cannabis, you know, on a continuous basis. So for anybody who takes it, it will be new. It's especially interesting, it will be especially interesting to me for somebody to have enough faith or trust in me to take it, to try the experience, to have the experience, who's never had cannabis before. And that's going to open their eyes, because I remember the first time I took it and it really opened mine. And once that opens, once you take the red pill and go down the rabbit hole, then what comes from it is truth, awareness, and realization. What more could you want?